We'll be starting off Parshas Vayera, and that's going to be on page 100 exactly. But before we get there, just one little recap from last week. We had the story of Lech Lecha. Now, in the story of Lech Lecha, there was, right at the end, you have Avram, you have his son, you have his children, well, only his one son, Yishmael, and Hashem commands them that you should give a bris to all of your household. And Avram gives himself a bris at the age of 99 years old, after which he gives a bris to Yishmael. I'd like to just show you on page 95. If we could look at this for a real quick second. On page 95, near the bottom. And right at the bottom, verse 25. Yishmael, his son, was 13 years old when the flesh of his foreskin was circumcised, and to his credit, Yishmael did not protest being circumcised. So we see that Yishmael at 13 years old, which is already considered a mature age. You're already halakhically considered an adult at that point. For some reason in America, you're considered an adult at 18. I don't know whether maybe people have got less mature over the generations. But you're considered an adult, you're considered as having your own opinions, and you have, halakhically, the legal freedom to choose whatever you want. You could say yes, you could say no. You're emancipated. So it's very interesting that Yishmael at 13 years old had a bris, which means it was by his own volition, it was by his own decision. He volunteered. As opposed to Yitzchak, we're going to see later in this parsha, that when Yitzchak was born, he had a bris at 8 days old. At 8 days old, you're a baby, and you have absolutely no opinion on what's going on, not even in the slightest. Even if you wanted to have opinion, you wouldn't be able to say anything. It's a tiny baby, a newborn. So it's very strange that we find that the sign, the covenant, the bris is supposed to be within the flesh of a person is a sign between them and Hashem. Why is that something that we look at as Jewish people, something special done at the age of 8 days old? Shouldn't we be more like Yishmael and say, hey, let's do it the older the better. Let's do it at a time when someone's mature, someone can appreciate it. Why don't we do this at a time when someone can choose to do it instead of having it done to them? Wouldn't entering into a pact, entering into a promise, entering into a connection with Hashem be so much more meaningful if we would do it at a time that we can understand it and we can live with it, we can appreciate it, and most importantly of all, that we can choose it. It's very strange that we say, the Muslims continue to do bris at 13. And Jewish people do it at 8 days old. And we see this as our sign between us and Hashem. We see the 8 days old as the most important thing. And the reason for that is, the reason we don't want to wait till you're 13, it's not like a side thing. It's not, well, maybe you don't want to at 13, and you shouldn't. It's because there's something much greater. It's something about being a Jew. You see, throughout history, the Jewish people, their connection to Hashem, has been one that is above intellect. Let's explain. Let's step back for a second. You have many people who act with intellect. They act sensibly. They do what the mind dictates in the situation. Then you have people who act in a way that is not according to the dictates of the mind. They act in a way that doesn't make sense. You ever seen that? Someone who acts in a way that is not normal. There could be two options. You can either have someone acting above intellect or below intellect. Let me give you an example. You're walking down the street on a hot summer's day, and there are two people walking down the street near you. One of them is wearing a big overcoat and gloves and a big furry hat, and the other one also has a big overcoat and a black furry hat. One of these people could be a meshugana, someone who's crazy. On a scorching hot Florida day, they're walking down South Beach, Miami, with a massive overcoat because they're posh as meshuggah. They never realize that they're going to get heat stroke like this. They're out of their mind. They need medical help. Then that's called below intellect. You're walking down, t-shirt, you're comfortable, you have a white cap on to keep the sun out of your eyes. Makes sense. That's normal. That's a normal thing to do. Someone with a big overcoat is acting below intellect, not normal. Then you see the other guy. The next guy is a Hasidic man walking to shul. Big overcoat, big black hat, And is it hot? Yes. Is he sweating? Yes. But why is he doing what he's doing? Is he doing it because he doesn't have the mind, the intellect, the normalcy to realize that this isn't a smart way to dress today? No, quite the opposite. He realizes very well that the most logical way to dress today would be in short sleeves. But he decided to go above and beyond the norm, above and beyond what would make sense, and do something more than that because of his conviction, because of his ideals, because of what he believes in. This is called above intellect. This is called rising beyond what makes sense. There's what's sensible, and then there's what's above sensible. There's what's natural and what's supernatural. So the Jewish people, their connection with Hashem is one that's greater than the mind. In general, we find nowadays people who they say they believe. I don't want to get into the discussion of believing in science, seeing it's a very unscientific statement, but you find many people nowadays who they say everything in life has to make sense, has to be according to your intellect. The only problem is, intellectually speaking, the intellect is limited. Anyone who's a thinker realizes that their thinking is confided to their education, to their IQ, to their knowledge base, and most of all, to human limitations. And there must be, logically speaking, something greater than logic. That's the paradox within logic. Within logic, everything has to be logical, including the fact that there's something more than logic. So that's the Jewish people's connection to Hashem. When you look at someone like Yishmael, he did what made sense. He sat down at a mature age and he thought about it and he decided he wants to have a spiritual connection with Hashem. You look at Yitzchak and he went above and beyond. His connection with Hashem was from the first moment. It was not according to intellect, because his connection with Hashem is above the mind. It's above what makes sense. And therefore, when things don't make so much sense, when it's not convenient, when it's not a good situation to be connected to Hashem, the Jewish soul perseveres, because it's above the intellect. I'd like to say a very interesting story that goes as follows. It was in the mid-1800s in Russia. Where was Russia in the mid-1800s? It took off most of Eastern Europe. So where in Russia, whether it was Poland or Romania or Hungary, I'm not sure, but it was in Russia. And the Tsar, they would say, legend has it, he liked to dress up like one of the common folks. Go mingle, hear what people are saying, hear the murmurings. Maybe he was a little paranoid about revolution. So he went to a bar, and he's sitting in a bar, trying to overhear conversation, talking to people, and a group of soldiers walk in, and most of them are on their best behavior. One of the soldiers, he keeps ordering another drink, and another drink, and another drink, and this soldier is getting pretty drunk. So the Tsar sits down next to him and says, hey, what's going on? Let's have a drink together. Tell me about yourself. The guy's like, yeah, I'm a Jewish soldier. I'm stationed in the base nearby. Oh, very nice. They're talking and talking. And the Tsar's like, why didn't you buy us another round? So the soldier's like, I'm out of cash. So the Tsar's like, figure it out. The soldier goes up to the bartender and says, hey, I'll give you a collateral or something. So the bartender looks at him and is like, what do you have that's worth something? So he pulls out his sword. not as a stick up, but as collateral. He says, hold on to this. I'll come tomorrow. I'll bring you the money. So, okay, I promise you, tomorrow, right after my shift on base, I'll get my sword back from you. Then he goes on drinking, and late in the wee hours of the morning, he goes back to his base. The Tsar, the first thing the next morning, announces he's making a surprise inspection of a nearby barracks. The soldiers start running, getting ready, preparing, polishing the shoes and sweeping the barracks. There's one Jewish soldier, he's missing his sword. You can't get on dress rehearsal without your sword. So he takes a piece of wood and he starts whittling. Remember the old Boy Scouts? He whittled there for hours. He's whittling away and he couldn't make the whole thing. He made a sword. He managed to figure it out. He made it. It looked nice. He stuck it in there. No one would notice, Anyways, he's standing on parade. The Tsar's looking through the troops, acting as if he's looking at people at random. And as he walks through, the Tsar stops by the man before the Jewish soldier and shouts out, why are you looking at me like that? And the soldier is shocked, bewildered, frightened, doesn't know what to say. The Tsar says, you just gave me a bad look. And he turns to the Jewish soldier, he says, pull out your sword and chop off his head. He knew quite well that this soldier did not have a sword, and he was going to prove it. He's going to catch him in the act right here and now. So the Jewish soldier looks up and he starts thinking quickly. And he says, Honorable Tsar, Your Excellency, who am I to judge the Tsar's decisions? But surely this man is not deserving of death. And I cannot decide this, but let God be my witness. If this man is not deserving of death, let my sword turn into wood. And he pulls out his sword and whacks the guy in the neck, and his sword's out of wood. Everyone was amazed, shocked, bewildered. And with that, the Tsar was very impressed that he was the only other one there who knew what happened. He was very impressed by this guy's quick thinking. Soon he kept an eye out. He let word be told that this soldier, that should keep an eye on him, send him to military school, training. Soon he was an officer. He worked his way up through the ranks. And eventually, he got very close to being a general. The only thing is, the Tsar invites him in for a meeting, which will appoint you as a high-ranking general. And the Tsar says, well, a good soldier like you have everything it takes. And the Tsar is looking through his records. And then he says, 1 second. Which religion were you again? And the man says, well, I'm Jewish. Not practicing, but I'm Jewish. The Tsar says, well, that's a disgrace. You're Jewish, and I've been taking care of you all this time? That's it. Tomorrow, we're going to convert you, and then I'll make you the most famous, most powerful man in Russia. The soldier thinks, and he thinks, and he thinks. And he decides, okay, I'm going to do it. What choice do I have? The next day, in the wagon, on the way to the ceremony, he's riding the Tsar's very own coach. And they're crossing a bridge. And on the way there, the soldier's looking out of the water. And he's thinking to himself, I'm a Jew. I might have power. I might have riches. I might have honor. But what's it all worth if I'm giving away being a Jew? And he jumps out the window of the coach into the water and was never seen again. The Tsar looked outside and muttered one word, just fool. He said, he's a fool. The Tsar couldn't understand or comprehend why someone would do something as nonsensical as giving away money, riches, fame, everything, power, everything that was precious in the eyes of this industrial age leader. Everything precious in his life, this man gave away for the sake of religion, for the sake of conviction. Why would he do that? He never understood. The Jewish bond to Hashem is one above intellect. Is one that comes from the soul. Is one that, just like Yitzchak, whether it makes sense, whether it doesn't, it's not below making sense. It's not doing something because it's silly. It's doing something because your conviction is stronger than whatever the winds of the current climate of the culture or politics or excitement or whatever it is in that day and age people are going after. The Jewish soul can overpower it. Which is why it's so important with Jewish education. You have some people who say that you raise a child and you'll think, okay, they'll be more religious, they'll be less religious. We'll figure it out when they're older. First, you should raise them, send them to a good school where they'll learn math and English. And then when they come to their bar mitzvah, we'll give them bar mitzvah lessons. We'll figure it out then. But really, the Jewish way should be like Yitzchak. From the youngest age, even before they really understand, a child should learn Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. The Torah was given to us by Moshe. They should learn Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, because the Jewish bond is above and beyond that. And with that, I'd like to take us on to Parshas Vayera. For the record, Greg, the way we do it is that we're going through the parsha, a little outside, a little inside, a little explanation. Then we have a deep dive that we're going to discuss one point. And then after that, we're going to have a roundtable discussion and hear everyone's questions, thoughts, answers, queries. All right, let's go on to page 101. And after circumcising himself, you have Hashem appears to Avram. And Avram was sitting outside the tent. Now this divine revelation, God appearing to him, and Avram, what's he doing? It's right after he had circumcised himself. At 99 years old, he's weak, he's sick, and he's sitting outside in the heat of the day. Why is it so hot outside? Because Hashem decided Avraham, who's famous for hosting guests, for hospitality, he's going to be up all day running around taking care of his guests. I'll make it a scorching hot day. Everyone will stay home in their air conditioning. He won't have any problems. What did Avram do? Quite the opposite. He sat outside in the scorching heat trying to find a guest. So as Hashem appears to him, he looks up and Hashem I made it scorching hot so he won't have guests, so he can rest. But now he's not resting anyways, and all he wants is guests. I'll give him some guests. He looks up and he sees 3 men standing there. And he asked Hashem to wait and ran towards them. And he says, my masters, please don't pass me by. stay here, I'll give you some water to wash your feet, and you can stay in my tent. Now, it's very interesting he gave them water to wash their feet, because in those times, they were in a pagan society. Avram was the only real champion of monotheism, of the belief in one God. And there were people who served all different strange things, including local travelers, who served the dust on their feet. Now, I don't know why you would have the idea to serve the dust on their feet, but Avram didn't want any idolatry in his house, so he would always give people water to wash their feet, so they wouldn't bring any of their idols, which is their dust inside. So they come inside, and he sat them down under the shade of a tree, and he said, okay, I'll give you some bread, I'll give you something to eat, please at least honor me with your presence until you continue. Now, these three men, who are really angels, said, yes, of course, we'd like to have your hospitality, because it wouldn't be right to say no to him. He was such a great, important man. So Avram began running around preparing for these three angels that he thought were men. He ran to his wife Sarah and said, start to please bake flour and take flour and bake bread, which at the time it was actually Pesach. And as we have a tradition that the forefathers kept the whole Torah before it was given, she would have gone to bake matzah. He then went and ran and took 3 calves and took them to his son Yishmael, who he was training into doing mitzvahs, and said, well, please prepare these calves for the men. They had a delicacy. Why didn't you need 3 calves for 3 men? Imagine an appetite like that. Eating a whole cow? You ever done that? So the reason is because the biggest delicacy was considered the tongue, and he wanted to prepare that for him. After that, I'll show you something very interesting. Look on page 103 at verse 8. On verse 8 on page 103, I'll read the bold words. He brought some cream and milk, then the calf that had been prepared, and placed it before them, and stood over them under a tree, and they ate. Isn't that strange? He brought them cream and milk, and then a calf. See the problem over here? It's milchiks and fleishiks. If he was keeping the Torah before it was given, why is he giving them milk to drink right before having meat? So there's 2 ways of approaching this on a very simple level. The very simple way of approaching this is, the reason he gave them milk first, before the meat, was because after having milk, there's a lot less waiting time, and it's a lot less strict to eat meat afterwards. As opposed to meat first, you wait a lot longer, and it gets stuck in your teeth. It's much harder to get out. Another explanation could be, quite simply, that he put them separately, and he just gave them offers. Do you want a dairy meal, or do you want a meat meal? And he prepared 3 calves, in case they wanted meat, and dairy, in case they wanted dairy. So let's continue, and these 3 mysterious guests start asking about his wife. Where's your wife? Where is she? And he says she is in the tent. Now, by this time, the Torah makes sure to point out that they were very elderly. Avram was 99 years old. Sarah was 90 years old. And Sarah was an elderly woman. She was ceased having, as we say in verse 11, ceased having a woman's cycle. There was no way she was going to have children. Why is this important? Because as follows. Because the angel then tells Avram, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening in the tent, and she began to laugh. And she said, now that I'm old, I have withered skin, will I become young again? And my husband's also too old to have a child. So Hashem said to Avram, why did Sarah laugh? Because is it beyond Hashem to give her a child? So Sarah said I didn't laugh because she was afraid that she would be in trouble. That things would go wrong here. But Hashem said, no, you did laugh. But seeing that she had heard from Hashem now, as opposed to from an angel, her doubts were quelled. She didn't have any problem. And after that, these 3 angels, these 3 men, got up. And at this point, you'll see on page 102, there's a little bit of English there, there's only 2 men left. Now the reason for that is because an angel is only sent to do 1 mission at a time. So the first angel, whose job was to heal Abraham from his, you can notice how he was running around? He was running around right after having a surgery because the first angel came to heal him and tell him about his wife giving birth. He had finished his mission, there were only 2 left. Now, what are these 3 angels? I would believe that these are angels of kindness, severity, and mercy, compassion. In generally speaking, those 3 angels would be referred to as Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. the one of healing, the one of mercy, the one of compassion, kindness, Michal, would be to heal Avram. The one of severity, the one of strictness, Gavriel, would be to overturn the cities. And the one of mercy would be to save Lot, as we'll see soon. So, turning over the page, they continue on, and these men go off towards Sodom. And the reason they're going there is to destroy the city. But Hashem says, how can I hide to Avram what I'm about to do with him? What I'm about to do to this city? Because I've given over this whole country to him. I promised him this land. How can I destroy part of it without telling him? So Hashem tells Avram that he's going to overturn the city because the outcry, you look at it on page 105, verse 20, because the outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah has become great and the sin is very grave. What was the outcry? The outcry was, our sages tell us, that they were incredibly inhospitable. It's very interesting to contrast what we had just a few pages ago with Avram, who was sitting out in the heat of the day looking to invite a guest in. And over here we have, in Sodom, people who, as sages tell us, when they have a guest, they would, if someone was short and didn't fit in the bed, say the bed's too big, they'd stretch their legs out. If they were too tall, they'd chop their legs off. So what was the outcry? There was one girl who saw a poor man, a beggar, a homeless person in the street, and she gave him some food. Now, in this city, where they were so wicked, they never had the biggest crime was to help a poor person, to help a guest especially, to help another. Perhaps the reason was because it was a very rich city and they didn't want to share the wealth with anyone else. They didn't want anyone else coming. Perhaps that was why. So, after which she had been caught helping someone, you ever heard of being tarred and feathered in the olden days? So what they did was they covered her in honey and set bees loose. And her cries came to Hashem. And Hashem said, this is too much. And Hashem says, I will descend and see if their deeds have matched the outcry that have come before me. I will annihilate them. And if not, I will know. I will know what to do with them. That was verse 21. This is a very important verse. You notice how Hashem's saying, I will descend and see. Isn't that a strange thing to say? Hashem's everywhere and sees everything. Why is it saying he will descend and see? He's already there. He already knows it. It's a lesson. It's a lesson for us. For a judge, someone who's legally a judge, before they bring a verdict, before they say what to do and what not to do, the halacha is they first have to research very carefully the situation. And that's what Hashem's teaching judges over here. If Hashem, who sees everything, has to descend and see what's going on and inquire and investigate before rendering a judgment, for sure a human judge has to look through all the evidence and speak to all the witnesses before bringing judgment. But let's speak about ourselves. Shelley, are we ever judges? When are we standing in judgment of others? When do we judge others?
In judgment?
When do we judge others?
We probably judge others every day.
Every day, there we go. We're always judging others. This person does this, and that guy's a ganef, and that guy's a meshuggah.
I did that same place.
There we go.
You're driving your car.
There we go. We're always speaking to you while you're driving over here. It's going to happen a lot, no? We're always judging others. So here Hashem's teaching us a very important lesson. If Hashem, who sees every circumstance and knows of everyone's inner feelings and thoughts, has to descend and go down and investigate before bringing judgment against someone, before rendering a verdict, how much more so ourselves? When we see someone doing something that's not right and not proper, we don't know what they're going through. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know what situation they're in. And just like us ourselves, that we know, okay, I know myself, I sometimes slip up. I sometimes do the wrong thing. I sometimes make a mistake. And why do I do that? For whatever situation, I'm sure, when it comes to myself, I always know. They say in Yiddish, for everything I have a reason. For this one, I was having a hard day that day. This one, I didn't get enough sleep the night before. This time I got angry at that guy because I didn't have breakfast. Whatever. I didn't mean it. I'm not a bad person. Something happened. So too when we look at someone else. When we look at our fellow, do we say, hey, that guy gave me a bad look. He must be a terrible person. Or maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe he's having trouble at home. He just got into a fight with his brother. I don't know. We should be more like Hashem and descend, go down. Why is Hashem coming down? He could stand up. It says in another pasuk, Mishamayim hibit Hashem ro'es kol bnei adam. From the heavens, Hashem watches and he sees all the works of man. Hashem sees everything from the heavens. Why is he coming down to the earth to see? The reason is, Hashem says, I will descend. You see in verse 21, I will descend and see. Because Hashem was coming down to be with the people, the sinners, the bad people. And while being with them, in their situation, from there you can only judge someone. They say in English, walk a mile in their shoes, right? You have to be able to, you can't, the sages, the way, I believe the original term, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, is actually from a statement of our sages in Pirkei Avos, in the Mishnah, where they say, do not judge another until you're standing in his place. And the reason for that is, just like Hashem comes down before judging someone, comes down to join them, to see where they're at, we can't really judge someone else until we truly appreciate where they're coming from, what their situation is. I was speaking to someone today who told me that in his life, he's a senior. He made some very bad mistakes in his life. And his family doesn't want to forgive him. It's been many years since then, and he's still not on talking terms with certain members of his family because of these very bad, objectively bad decisions he's made in life. And he was telling me about the pressure he was under at the time and the stress. And when you hear someone describing their feelings and being overwhelmed and having so much going on, and then you realize there's a person here who made a bad decision. There's a person, he's not a bad person. He was in a situation where he made the wrong decision. And when you look at someone from the outside, when you say, okay, I'm going to be standing in the heavens and looking. I'm a tzaddik, I'm perfect, I'm standing in the heavens, and I'm looking from there. Everyone has issues. You can say something bad about everyone. But Hashem shows us over here, I will descend and see. When you go down and invest yourself into another person's situation, only then can you really see where they're coming from. There's a very interesting story of the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Shmuel, who lived in the small town of Lubavitch, now it's in Belarus, in 1860s. He was actually the shortest serving Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he had very bad health. That was the reason for that. So he was a great leader, and he had lines of people by the door, always looking to ask his advice, his blessing. And his shamash, which is the old Yiddish attendant. In English it's called a sexton. You know how every Jewish word has to have some English word no one knows? You know, the sexton stands in the tabernacle and puts on phylacteries. So anyhow, the attendant, he would constantly have to bring a change of clothes, like every hour. Because the Rebbe would sweat through all his layers and have to get changed after an hour. Over and over, several times a day while he's receiving all these guests. And it didn't make sense. You know, Russia is not exactly the Belarus, it's not exactly the warmest place in the earth. And he was indoors, he was sitting down. At some point, one day, the attendant's walking outside with the Rebbe's old clothes after he gotten changed, which were dripping with sweat. And he mentioned to someone, I just don't understand. Why does he schwitz so much? Why does he sweat so much? I don't get it. The Rebbe overheard and came out and said, sir, I'm going to keep paying your salary, but I'm sorry, you're not fit to do this job anymore. So he said, Rebbe, okay, I shouldn't be questioning the Rebbe, but it just doesn't make sense. Who sweats their clothes through every hour when they're just receiving guests for an interview? The Rebbe told me, you don't understand. When I'm speaking to someone comes and asks me how they can experience prayer better, how they can experience the Torah study better. Or someone has a different question. This one can't find someone to get married to. This one isn't able to make a parnasa, he doesn't have any money. That one is having trouble getting along with his wife. This one is childless. And everyone's coming for a blessing, for advice. Everyone's asking me to speak to them. Each one of them, I have to put myself in their shoes. I have to see myself in their situation, in their feelings, in their emotions, to truly understand their questions and queries and problems. But then, to give them an answer, they didn't give themselves an answer. They needed someone on the outside. They needed a Rebbe. They needed someone objective. They needed someone who can have a greater view. So therefore, I have to go back into my own feelings. I have to put myself in my own shoes. I have to put myself in the Rebbe's mindset. I have to put myself on the outside of them. I have to look over this objectively. So I have to change into their clothes, and then change back into my clothes, and then the next guest comes, figuratively speaking, of course, on an emotional level. I have to change into their emotions, then change back into my emotions. You know how difficult that is, getting dressed and undressed so many times every hour? Obviously I'm sweating. What's the lesson of this story? He was showing something fascinating. That to truly emphasize with someone, to truly be there for someone, or on the other hand, to judge someone and look at someone, we first have to put ourselves in their shoes. We have to be like Hashem and descend and see. First we have to go down to their situation, no matter how far down it is, from the high heights of Hashem to the lowest lows of Sodom and Gomorrah, who so many years later are still the famous example of the sinning cities. Las Vegas. And to go down there in order to see someone else, to see them at where they're at. And with that, I'd like to continue with our story. So, Hashem decided that Sodom and Gomorrah must be destroyed, but he told Avraham, I'm going to destroy the city. Now, Avraham, his entire life was about chesed. He embodied chesed, kindness. And he did everything he could to save the city. He first tells Hashem, would you destroy the righteous together with the wicked? It would be unfair if the righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed just because of their wicked neighbors. Now, really, it wouldn't be fully unfair, because imagine living in such a cruel city. If someone was really righteous, they would go and do something about it. They'd try to influence their neighbors. They'd try to pick it up. But still, Avram, he gave it a shot. He gave it a shot over here by saying, this is something, at least in the merit of these good people, at least save the rest. So Avram said in the area of Sodom, in general, the two biggest cities were Sodom and Gomorrah, or in English, Sodom and Gomorrah. There was 5 cities in the plain, in that area, which is now the Dead Sea area. You ever been to Israel? You've been by the Dead Sea? You get to float in it? So that area, in the times of Avram, you've been there? Stunning, no? Don't taste the water.
Oh, no.
You get anything in
I
your
never
mouth?
did have to jump into the sulfur pools because the salt is so potent that the slightest scratch,
It's
it
terrible.
burns.
It's terrible. you step in, something I never thought about is that salt, it gathers, it congeals, comes together. So the actual steps, you're coming in from the beach, not really the beach, but the sands, and then you start stepping in, and it's all salt rock. It's like digging into your feet.
No, it's not salt rock.
That's not where you were?
No, it's extremely salty.
Mm.
So you can walk into it, but you can only float. You can't drown in it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Unlike any other experience. So what happened before that was overturned, like we'll find out soon? There was 5 cities in the plain. So Avram says, Hashem, if there's 50 tzaddikim, 50 righteous people, 10 for each city, save these cities in their merit. So Hashem says, okay, I would love to do that, but there isn't 50 righteous people. So Avram says, how about 45? 45, because you have 9 in each, and then Hashem will make up the minyan. Beautiful idea. Hashem says, great idea, but there's no 9 righteous people. And they keep going over here with Avram saying, how about 40 people and you can save 4 cities? How about 36 and Hashem will make up the minyan? And Hashem says, well, there isn't that. He says, how about 30 and save 3? How about 27? How about 20 and save 2 cities? How about 18 and Hashem will make up the minyan? How about 10? How about 9? And he gets down at the last city. He's trying to save at least 1 city and says, there are 9 righteous people. And Hashem will make up the minyan. Hashem says, there isn't 9 righteous people. At that point, Avram gives up. He didn't give up due to laziness or due to apathy, but he knew that in the generation of the flood, there were 8 righteous people. There was Noach, Noach's wife, there was Noach's 3 sons, and their 3 wives. That's 8. So he figured if the 8 righteous people in the times of the great flood did not have the merit to save the rest of the world, it's not going to work here either. That's why 9 was his last bet. And after this, you have a very interesting pasuk that we say that Hashem, we have here that Hashem departed when he had finished speaking to Avram, and Avram returned home. It was why? You have a court case going on here. Hashem is the judge, and the defense is Avram. The prosecution would probably be the actions of the people Sodom themselves. So as soon as the defense was quiet and had nothing left to add, the judge picked up and went. And Avram, he had nothing to do there. So now this is going to take us on to the story of the angels on page 109 coming into the city of Sodom. And as they walk into the city, they come in right about nightfall. Now, as they walk into the city, they come across Lot. Lot, you remember from last parasha, was Avram's troublesome nephew. And as they walk into the city, they come across him. Now, he was sitting at the gates. As you'll see across all different parts of the Torah and the prophets. For example, the first verse of Parashat Shoftim is Shoftim v'Shoftim titin lecha b'chol sharecha. You have judges and policemen you shall appoint at all your gates. The judges of the city would sit by the gates, the magistrates. So we have Lot, who had just been appointed a judge. He had been appointed to a very high position over there. And he was sitting at the gate, and he saw these guests coming. Now he knew that the main law of Sodom was no guests. We don't want to share with anyone, we don't want anyone. Everyone just leave us alone. But he had spent many years living in Avram's tent. And Avram taught him that receiving guests was very important. So he said to them, dear guests, these two men who walked in, please come, turn aside and stay by me. Spend the night, bathe your feet, and then wake up early and continue on your way. So it's very interesting. You'll look at verse number 2. I'm just going to read the bold words. He said, now my masters, now my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house, spend the night, bathe your feet, and then wake up early and continue on the way. The reason he said turn aside was because he didn't want them walking straight to his house. He'd be in big trouble if he's caught with guests in his house. He wanted them to go in a roundabout way. Now it's interesting, he first says spend the night, then says bathe your feet. Remember how Avram got the people to wash their feet first thing before they walked into his tent? Because he didn't want any idol worship in his house, and people would worship dust from their feet. Here, Lot, who's not such a tzaddik, he says first spend the night, then wash your feet. He doesn't care about the idol worship. Yeah, sure, you can worship idols. It's very interesting over here, that difference, you see, the contrast between someone like Avram and someone like Lot. So they said, no, we'll spend the night in the city square itself. So Lot begins to plead with them and please say, come to my house. So they came to his house and began to eat. Now something very interesting here is that Lot asked his wife, please, there's no salt for the guests. His wife, who I believe was a native of Sodom, she was very unimpressed. And she says, you don't just want food for them, you also want to give them salt, some delicacies. And she decided she's letting word out about this. Her husband, the chutzpah, has to give guests whatever they want. She goes to the neighbor's house and starts to say, my husband wants salt for his guests. Do you have any salt for my husband's guests? The guests that my husband has, And before you know it, news is out. News is out. So people began banging on the door. Crowd showed up with young people in front of the old people, pushing and shoving. And they shouted, the mob was shouting, we want these men, we'll show them exactly what we think of them. And Lot goes outside and starts to reason with them, and they start screaming at him, you came here as a guest, you aren't from here natively, and now you think you're a judge, you think you're in charge of us. So they started pushing against him, they started attacking him, and these two mysterious men, these angels, stretched out their hands, dragged him inside, closed the door, and all of a sudden, the men outside, the mob, were struck with blindness. They couldn't find the entrance. So they start telling him, we're about to destroy the city. Get your family out. But Lot begins speaking to his sons-in-law and his married daughters, and they laughed at him. At this point, Lot starts gathering up his money, his treasures. You know how people are. And when it comes push to shove, they say when the airplane, after the crash landing, leave all valuables aboard. Yeah? I remember seeing a video of an airplane, and it didn't have a crash landing, but they had, I think there was smoke in the cabin or something, so they had to make an emergency landing. People jumped up, grabbing bags and suitcases. That's how it is, that's how it is. So Lot's busy grabbing his treasures, and these men just grab him, his wife, and his two unmarried daughters, and drag them out of town. And they said, run for the hills, because only in the merit of Avram, who lives far away in the hills, may you be saved. At this point, Lot begins to be very scared, and he says, please don't make me go live with Avram. Because in a city like Sodom, I was the tzaddik, I was saved. If I live with Abraham, in comparison with him, I'll be the Rasha. Who knows what will happen to me? I'll be wicked. So he goes to he wants to live in a nearby city, but he ends up being too scared and runs away. Meanwhile, his wife turns around to look at Sodom. This is something very, very wrong. That she was saved from a city, and she's just as wicked as them. Why is she busy entertaining herself with watching their destruction? So what happened was that she, as soon as she turned around to look, do we have the verse over here? Just a moment. Where's it gone? Oh, here we go. On page 113. You ready for this one? Page 113, verse 26. Lot's wife turned around, looked behind him at the destruction, and she became a pillar of salt in retribution for having denied salt to her guests. So over here, it's called midah keneged midah, which means you get what you ask for. That Hashem rewards and punishes people exactly according to. Can't you measure it with their actions? She had denied them salt. It was with salt that she had been wicked, and she had gone and spread the news they were in town, causing them to be attacked, and she was punished with salt. Meanwhile, Lot decided that he can't risk going to a smaller city and runs off to the hills. He goes into a mountain cave, and there happened to be, and of course nothing ever happens to be, wine in that cave. Now his daughters, this is a very strange story. You ready for this? What do you think they're watching as the entire plain, this sulfur and ashes fell down from the sky into Sodom? The entire place was on fire until Hashem overturned the rock that Sodom was made on, the entire valley was made on. Generally speaking, geographically, different areas of land are on different plates of, what do they call them again, Shelley? When there's an earthquake, it's because there's two tectonic plates. Tectonic plates? There we go. Teutonic plates are maybe from a knight from medieval age. And two tectonic plates rubbing against each other. So the plate that Sodom was on, apparently, was flipped over, was overturned. Sodom would have been buried into smoldering nothingness, and what's left there is the Dead Sea. So you have Lot and his daughters hiding out in a cave, and his daughters think that they're the last people on earth. So let me ask you, what do you think Lot's daughters were thinking when they think that the entire world has been destroyed, just like with the flood, and it's them and their father left? It's the end of the human race, unless they do something about it.
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah, this is a weird one, right? So they decide the most logical thing to do is to get their father drunk and become pregnant with him. Now, something very interesting, if you read through the story, that the older daughter is the instigator, and she ends up calling her child Moav, which means, of in Hebrew means father. Moav means from the father. She was very, let's just say, not too ashamed about it. As opposed to the younger daughter named her son Ben Ami, which means the son of my nation, or of those related to me, which is a little bit more tzniistic, a little bit more appropriate. And you'll see later when you come to the Shir in about like 30 weeks, you'll see that Hashem deals with the people of Ammon and Moav slightly differently, and you see the people of Moav end up being more aggressive to Jewish people, probably because their spiritual DNA, one nation came from promiscuity, and one came from someone a little bit more tzniistic. Let's move on to this one. We're running out of time, so we're going to go quite quickly through Avram in Philistia, in the land of the Philistines. Now, if you remember last parasha, Avram traveled to Egypt, and he tried the old wife in the box trick. And he said, she's my sister, she was in a box. This time he didn't try the wife in the box trick, because it didn't work last time. But he tried this, she's my sister trick again. So, guess what happens? Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, drags off Sarah to the palace. She ends up sitting in the palace, but the people in the palace suddenly start getting sick. Avimelech has a dream that Hashem says to him, you're going to die because of this woman you took, because she's married. And he says, I didn't know she's married. I thought the man she's traveling with is her brother. So Hashem said, because I knew that you were innocent in this, I caused you not to sin. Very interesting. In general, our sages tell us the path a man chooses for himself is the one that he's led on. People say, why do such things happen to me in life? Usually Hashem watches what decisions we make and then help us double down on those decisions. So, Abimelech to say this in very short, I apologize that this is going to be in short. Avimelech says, well, you have to take your wife back. Why did you say it was your sister? And Avram says, well, it's because she's descended from my father. Sarah was his niece. So Avram's father, Terah, was Sarah's grandfather. So he said, she's kind of my sister. She's descended from my father. And then Avimelech says, please leave. We're going to give you tons of money, flocks, cattle, bonds, and bondwomen. The reason for that was that no one should say that he did what he wanted and then he just released Sarah because he was sick of her. Rather, the fact that he had a massive payout showed that he was forced into it by divine intervention. And now I'd like to focus on, in just a moment, I want to focus on. We have in chapter 21 that Yitzchak is born when Sarah was 90 years old and Avram was 100 years old. And everyone was amazed and that she was born. Now, he was called Yitzchak. Why is that? Sarah said in verse 6, Sarah said, God has brought me happiness. Whoever hears will be happy for me and happy with me. You see, tzchoik, the source of that word, means laughter or happiness. And we're going to actually look into that word very soon. When she was told that Yitzchak would be born, she laughed out of scoffing. She said, how could that be that a 9-year-old woman would give birth? When he was born, she laughed out of happiness and out of thanks to Hashem. That's why he was called Yitzchak. This is a very important lesson here. Just like Sarah first laughed in a scoffing way and later laughed out of thanks and out of just such a epiphany of happiness and thanks to Hashem, so too all our attributes, all our abilities, and all our feelings, we can use them out in a good way or a bad way. Like laughter, we can use it to scoff or we can use it for celebration. Let's say anger, we can be angry at someone else, or we can use it to be a drive to do more that's positive. Some people accomplish a lot. I don't know, maybe someone loses weight or breaks an addiction. Often it's fueled by anger. You'll have someone who has perseverance. He can use it to accomplish good things or to persevere to make trouble. Kids in school, there are two types of kids by parent-teacher interview. You have one that the parents come and they hear, wow, your daughter is such a good student, she's always helpful, she learns well. Then the other parents show up and hear, your daughter has so much potential. So much potential. But it's really true though. It's really true. Because there's no such thing as a bad personality. There's no such thing as a bad person, no such thing as a bad personality, no such thing as bad emotions. Everything Hashem made is for good. And Hashem gave us the ability. Will we use it for good or for bad? So we're all like Sarah, who first used her laughter to scoff, and later used her laughter out of giving thanks and celebrating Hashem's miracle. So we can ask ourselves, with each one of our abilities, with our personality, with our unique character traits, do we use that for good or for bad? So let's go. I'm going to skip over a few pages here. There's quite a bit I wanted to speak about here, the story of Hagar and Yitzchak, but I want to respect everyone's time right now. And I want to look at something very, very interesting on page 123. That this is kind of an ending to the whole story of the children right before the story of the Akedah. On 1, 2, 3, there is verse 33. Avram opened an inn in Beersheba. He also planted an orchard in Beersheba in order to provide him with fruit to serve his guests. And he proclaimed the name of Hashem, God of the world. He also induced others to proclaim the name of God. Okay, they included quite a bit of explanation in that translation. I want to read to you the Hebrew. You ready? And he planted a orchard in Beersheba. Vayikra Sham, and he called there, B'Shem Hashem, in the name of God, Kel Olam, God world. So there's something very interesting. He called out in the name of Hashem, God world. Let's deal with two things firstly. Our sages teach us, Avram, al tikra v'yikra el v'yakri. Don't say he called out in the name of Hashem. Rather say vayakre. He made others call out. There's a secret meaning in this verse. That Avram didn't just go declaring his faith. He didn't just act in accordance with Hashem's wishes. He went to others and says, why don't you declare your faith in Hashem? He spoke to others. He convinced others. He encouraged others to believe in Hashem. When Avram discovered the idea of one Hashem, he could have kept it to himself and the world would still be a pagan, lawless society like it once was, with child sacrifice and whatnot. Avram decided to go and spread the knowledge, and he made others call out in the name of Hashem. There's a very interesting story. Sages tell us, how do you cause others to call out in the name of Hashem? What are you going to tell someone who's raised their entire life as pagans? So he had this inn in the middle of the desert in Beersheba. You ever been to Beersheba? It's the last cavalry charge. You know that? The last successful cavalry charge, 1917. The Australian cavalry took the Turkish positions there. Anyhow, so just making sure you all know that. Very important part of Chumash this week.
Especially if it's Australians.
It's Australians, that's why I know about it. So they have in Australia they have a lot of World War I memorials. They're very into the First World War, the Anzac troops. So they're very into, for various reasons. It was a very young country at the time and the whole generation of youth was wiped out. So they have us in Newcastle, where my brother-in-law is the rabbi, and one of my nephews, he's like, look, we're going to a memorial. He found lever in there. I'm like, wow, great job. Great job. Anyhow, so what's going on over here? Let's talk about this. He has in the middle of Beersheba, in the middle of a desert, he has an inn, a little place to stay with his little orchard out back, with some fruit. And anyone who's traveling through the desert, this is the only place to stay. So when they go to him and have a nice meal, sit down, put up your feet, and then they say, okay, what do we owe you? So he would say, you don't owe me anything. You owe it to Hashem. Everything's from Hashem, not from me. I don't owe anything. Everything belongs to Hashem. So bless Hashem. So most people getting such a good deal, straight up stand up and bless Hashem. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me everything, and go on their way. Now sometimes you have someone who's very staunch pagan, and they say, no, it doesn't belong to Hashem, it belongs to you, and I'll pay you. So everyone says, it belongs to me. So how about 100 gold coins? So they say, that's outrageous. That's terrible. You know what? I wouldn't mind blessing Hashem. There's a very interesting lesson of this story. That it's a shtickle af nagel. He's doing a shtick over here. You would think Avram would talk to people and say, you should believe in one God for these reasons. The Rambam speaks about how Avram authored books, in that time it would have been scrolls, of logically arguing against the idea of idol worship, which was the whole world then. It was idol worship was an obsession, and talking about the one God. So he did go on that path. But when it came down to it, he would pressure people. He wouldn't force anyone, He didn't pull out a knife. He could have done that also. He could have had his inn on the side of the road and then beat people up until they say Shema Yisrael or something. He didn't do that. But he did use a little leverage. He did pressure people over here. And it's a very interesting lesson because a lot of people think that when it comes to spreading Torah, when it comes to spreading Kush, when it comes to spreading Hashem, everything has to be done. You want to join in? Good. If not, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to pressure you. People think, I'm going to go to my neighbor and tell them, maybe do a mitzvah or something. No, I don't want to pressure them at all. Avram teaches us here that it's worth it to put in a bit of effort. It's worth it to maybe nudge someone a little bit. He wasn't aggressive, but maybe it's worth it to nudge someone. You would think, what's the point of nudging someone? What's the point of doing this whole trick that Avram did? If someone believes, they believe. If they don't believe, what's the point of saying it even? So they said it to get a free meal. What's the point of blessing Hashem if they don't believe in it? The reason is because deep down, everyone believes in Hashem. Deep down, we have a soul. And we know that Hashem is the truth. The question is that soul revealed like it is on Yom Kippur when we shout Yishma Yisrael? Or on a regular day, do we not feel it? And we're like, you know what? I don't feel like Hashem today. I'll stay in bed. Avram would pressure people not to try change them, to try allow them to be themselves. There's a very interesting halacha that if there's a guy who refuses to give his wife a get, they're breaking up and he says, you know what, I'm not giving you a get, I'm not interested in it, you can't get remarried, too bad. So halachically speaking, this shouldn't be done nowadays, but in an era where the Beis Din was the legal court, such as in ancient Israel, where the legal system was the halachic system, they would whack the guy. They'd beat him up until he agreed to give it.
My old rabbi said that he would do that because my husband didn't want to give me that. He says, we'll break both his legs, we'll give him that.
Don't try this at home. Don't try this at home. Might end up in a federal pen.
Yeah. He would have been too scared to report it.
Maybe. But you're allowed to. So let me ask you a question. Halachically speaking, a get is only valid if someone willingly gives it. Otherwise, you can, knock the guy out and grab his hand and, make sure the guy's sleeping.
Willingly signed it.
Yeah, there we go. So why are you pressuring someone into it that's not willing if they're being pressured into signing it? The reason is because deep down, everyone wants to do the right thing. Deep down, everyone has a soul and wants to do the right thing. Sometimes the soul is covered over by jealousy, by anger, by hurt emotions, by trauma. Sometimes our soul is covered by many layers. But deep down, we want to do the right thing. So if someone's so-called pressured into doing something good, it doesn't mean it's unnatural. It doesn't mean they're faking it. It means that for some strange side reason, those layers on their soul have been pushed away, and now they could just go back to normal, of being attached to Hashem.
Do you know there are women still waiting for get 15, 20 years?
It's a very sad situation. I should mention that for Ashkenazi Jews, for the past 1,000 years, it goes both ways. That since the time of Rabbeinu Gershom, who instituted that a man cannot marry two wives, I believe a man cannot get remarried if his wife refuses to accept a divorce. So it goes both ways, and it's very, very sad and upsetting to me to see that there are people out there who will take someone they love, a spouse, whether it's their husband or their wife, and out of spite, because of whatever reason it is, do something as I wouldn't say mean, as horrible as twisting religion to punish the other. I think it's very horrible.
Because he can get married, but she can't.
So if he's Sephardic, perhaps, but in the current, since Rabbeinu Gershom he instituted 3 decrees. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 is you can't read someone else's mail. He was the unequivocal leader of the Jews. He lived in Constantinople. I believe it was the capital of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. And it's called Rabbeinu Gershom Meir HaGoyla, which means the light of the exile. So the first one is you can't read someone else's mail. The second is a man cannot take 2 wives, which is why you'll see in the Torah, everyone has multiple wives, but you won't find any Ashkenazi Jew in the past 1,000 years who's done that. Some Sephardim, when they came to Israel, they had a very interesting situation. Israeli law doesn't allow for polygamy, for marrying more than one. You had people who came from Yemen, older couples, who had multiple wives, because they were never part of it. He was the leader of the Ashkenazi world. So you can't take on more than 2 wives, and he also made a rule that get is only valid if the wife accepts it. So we have something very interesting, that if a wife doesn't accept a get, the husband's not allowed to marry a second wife. So in the current era, it would work both ways, and either spouse, if they choose, for whatever reason, to do such a vile act of trying to hold their ex hostage, would, I wouldn't say be successful, because I don't believe anyone who chooses to do what's wrong will ever be successful ultimately. But they both have the power to choose what's wrong. And more importantly, the power to choose what's right.
But most of the time the women want to get, the husbands are the ones that hold out.
You have all sorts of weird cases. In America, divorce is very common. It's an industry. I was teaching in a certain school. I had a kid in my class, Nebuch. His parents had been divorced 10 years, and they went back to court. I couldn't believe it. Imagine that, broken up for 10 years, and they went back to court and dragged the kid in. Poor kid was broken. I'm telling you, they're the ones who lose the most. Divorce, in a legal sense, is very, very ugly. In a halachic sense, it's also ugly. It's just an ugly business. Monetarily, it's ugly. It's just one big ugly business.
It is.
So, am I excusing anyone? No. I think there's a lot of bad things that happen when it comes to divorce, including what you're talking about. Yeah, including what you're talking about. It works also, people do it in legal court. People who aren't Jewish, they take custody they try to use custody as leverage to get more money. There's a lot of ugly things that happen when it comes to divorce. It's so sad. I knew a guy, Greg, in Long Island. Nice guy. He moved to Florida, Sarasota. He's a lawyer. He started off his career in family court. After 6 months, he said he's never going back to it. Went into finance. And the reason was, he told me, he just couldn't stand that two people who loved each other could go and
Argue.
not only argue, but do everything they could to ruin each other. He couldn't stand it.
Right.
And anyhow, getting on to happier things. Let's talk about this for 1 second, and then we're going to finish up. That he called out in the name of Hashem. He made others call out in the name of Hashem. What did he call out? Kel Olam. This means God world. Let's talk about those words. Because Kel HaOlam means God of the world. Kel La'olam means God to the world. Kel Me'olam would be God from the world, which wouldn't make much sense. Kel Olam just means God world. Why were you saying God? He called out God world, not God of the world. You're supposed to proclaim Hashem is the God of the world. The reason is because there are many people who think that God, religion, spirituality is very separate from the world. I have my life, I have my business, I have my family, and then on Yom Kippur I'll go to shul and I'll deal with God then. Avram called out quite the opposite. He said God and world should be intertwined. Everything in your life should be about Hashem. God is in the world, not only is God of the world, everything in the world is godliness. Everything in the world is inherently spiritual. And it's up to us to take advantage of that. Let me give you an example. You can have a kid who's sitting in school, learning Chumash, looking out the window, waiting for recess to run outside. So he has his time learning, and he has his time of recess, and there's no connection. You have another kid who's playing outside by recess. Why? In order I can get out my energy so I can learn better afterwards. His entire recess is in order. I tell my students this all the time. You don't have to learn all day. You can go play for hours. Go play basketball, kick the ball around, play with your siblings, with your friends. That's not a break from Torah and davening. That's part of your Torah and davening. When you go to recess with the intention that I need to get my energy out so I can learn better, this is part of your learning experience. This is part of your Torah experience. The same thing with everything we do. When we eat, we can either eat like a glutton just to have a good time, or we can say, well, I need a good meal so I can be healthy, and then I'll be able to do a mitzvah. When we go, let's say you go play golf with your family, it could either be because I want to have fun, or because Hashem wants me to have a good relationship with my family. Everything we could do in the world could be like Avram taught, Kel Olam, God world. There is no separation. Everything in our lives could be and should be holy. This is what it's taught, that B'chol derechecha de'ehu, where it says, in all your ways you should know Hashem. Everything we do should be a spiritual experience. Some people feel like, well, when I go for a walk outside, that's not a spiritual experience. I'll go to shul for a spiritual experience. No. When you go for a walk outside, it's in order to appreciate God's creation. When you go to the gym, it's in order to be healthy, so you'll be able to get out of bed the next day and do a mitzvah and daven. When you go to voice lessons, it's in order that you can maybe sing a bit better when you're saying your morning prayers. Next day, with a little bit of chazonus. Everything we do in our life, depending on how we approach it, could be a spiritual endeavor. Or everything we do in our life could be a selfish endeavor. Some people go to shul and it's got nothing to do with Hashem. You got to make grandma happy. So at the end of the day, we should be like Avram. Call out in the name of Hashem, which means get others to call out. Tell other people, hey, why don't you be a Jew? Why don't you come to a shir, Torah class? I'm really enjoying it. You'll enjoy it also. And you know what gave Avram the chutzpah to do that? To go about to all his friends and family and random strangers on the street and tell them, you should call out in the name of Hashem, because he believed in Kel Olam. Because he believed that God and the world have no separation, have no distinction. Because he believed that everything is spiritual and everyone is inherently spiritual, he believed in the inner goodness in every person, in the inner spirituality of every person. He believed that every person he went to, deep down, really wants to hear his message. And he believed that every situation he was in, if everything's created by Hashem, everything's being run by Hashem, everything is godliness, so every situation must be an opportunity to spread the word of Hashem. Wherever he is, whether he was in the mall, or trekking through the desert, or out surfing, he's there. Hashem put him there for a reason. Hashem made him meet someone else for a reason. It must be to tell him about Hashem's goodness, about come to shul, do a mitzvah. It must be, why am I in the mall today? I met this guy, It must be because God is in the world, is part of the world, is part of my life. Why don't you put on tefillin? And I think this is a lesson to each of us. I want to give a challenge to each of you to be like Avram and go out and call out in the name of Hashem and tell your friends, not just I call out, but you should also call out. Why don't you come to the shir next week? That's my challenge for you. Go over to one friend and invite them to the shir next week. Anyways, fantastic.